Good day, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. My name is Jonathan Verdua, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend and colleague, esteemed colleague, Steve Wiss. Steve, how are you? I listened to you on a rival podcast, or not a rival, actually, one of your partner podcasts last night, talking about the final of the Euros. Quite enjoyed it, and it was nice to get an insight into what it's like to be on a podcast with Steve Wiss and be on the other side of it. So, how are things, my friend?
Very good, thank you. Yeah, shouts out to at Because We Win on YouTube. It's not quite Guardian Weekly, is it? But I'm glad you enjoyed the episode. Yeah, I mean, you're like me. I tend to be. I mean, I've only quite a lot of shows, podcasts, and there's so many different people out there who have different views, and it's always good to lock horns sometimes, isn't it? With sort of someone a bit different. So I'm glad you enjoyed the show. I'm doing all right. Things are a bit better for me now. Settled down a bit more at home. It was a bit manic 2-3 weeks ago, but thankfully things are improved in that way. So I hope you're doing really well.
Yeah, good, thanks. And I'm glad to hear that you're okay and the family situation is good as well. On this podcast, we are going to delve into a little bit of transfer talk. So the aim of the show will be just to bring in, there's been the summer windows are nearly opening. There's been one of two ins and outs in Scandinavia, Norway and Sweden. So we're going to feature some players that we've had requests about in recent weeks, and also catch up on the latest goings on, obviously in Sweden and Norway. In Sweden, in part 2, we'll talk about the return of Allsvenskan, because it was the first round of games back from the summer break. And of course, in Norway, there's been a couple of rounds now. So we will catch up on that, Steve, as well. So let's get cracking with Norway. I mean, I know you've written a little list of transfers. Did you want to first sort of start by talking about the latest goings on in Norway? I know there's been a few games.
I think there's only really one place to start, because me and you actually messaged each other at the same time this evening. Literally the same time. And I think it was when the third goal of Rosenborg, of Sarpsborg, went in the back of the net against Rosenborg, because we're recording on Friday evening. There was one game, Sarpsborg beat Rosenborg 4-1. And, just a couple of weeks ago when they lost against Viking, you actually messaged me and said they're a disgrace. And I was thinking along the same lines. I was thinking, no, I just remembered. I just remembered what you had said, and it stuck in my mind. And I was thinking along the same today when they were 3-0 down after 31 minutes. So, yeah, we've got to start there, really. Rather a sensational start to the Eliteserien round 14.
Yeah, it's incredible. And we'll just sort of recap for those who might not be aware of the score. Sarpsborg 4, Rosenborg 1. 4 goals from Meister, Henrik Meister. And we need to talk about him maybe as well a little bit, because that is incredible. But Rosenborg battered again. I did sort of mention to you the other day when they were just getting beat again. They're currently 8th in the table. They've lost 7 out of 14 games. As you've mentioned there, they're not doing very well this season. And Sarpsborg now climbed to 9th in the table, one place below them after that win. They're on 16 points, Rosenborg on 17 points. Top of the table, Glimt on 33, by the way, with 14 played, just to let you know. Brand second in the league and Molde third. Steve, talk to us about this game, because, I mean, I know we have talked about Rosenborg quite a lot, but sometimes I feel like we don't talk about them enough in a way, because they're such a massive club for that region. But do they even deserve to be talked about? I mean, what is going on?
They have the worst away record in Eliteserien, Jonathan. The worst of any team. And they've lost their last 2 away games, 4-2 against Viking and 4-1 against Sarpsborg. Now, I suppose you can forgive them actually losing the games, but in the manner that they've lost them, to concede 8 goals, and it probably could have been more goals as well, is nigh on a disgrace, really. I mean, I tweeted tonight.
Was it deserved 4-1 in your opinion, or was it kind of...
I mean, see if you can guess how many corners Sarpsborg racked up tonight against them.
12.
None. Didn't have a single corner. So basically, it was a weird sort of match in that the first 3 goals were pretty much self-inflicted wounds from Rosenborg. The goalkeeper, Sander Tangvik, I would have substituted him off after 35 minutes. He was that bad today. He was completely at fault for the first goal. He's dallying on the ball, not even aware that Henrik Meister was coming up behind him, and Meister just nicked it off him and put it into an empty net. That was goal number 1. The second goal, his positioning at the near post was terrible. And Meister nicked in and toe poked it home. And then the third goal, the goalkeeper rushed out halfway between his penalty area and the halfway line, just missed the ball, allowed Meister just again an empty net. So Tangvik, and I'm not his defense also, there's a clear lack of communication there. So that doesn't help. But he just had a terrible day. And look, goalkeepers can have a bad game. That can happen. But he was so bad, I would have subbed him off after 35 minutes. So, self-inflicted wounds, really. But Sarpsborg just pressed them so well first half. They did this against Glimt. I mentioned it on the last episode. And, so the stats might not show it was a hammering, but it kind of was. Second half, Rosenborg kind of laid siege to the goal. There was a fourth goal, of course, as well, from Meister, who we will talk about in a minute. But XG, actually, Rosenborg had more XG, but a lot of that is because they were obviously trailing for the whole entirety of the game and they racked up a lot of shots.
Let's not forget, Steve, that they also just their previous game lost 4-2 to Viking as well. So that's 8 goals conceded in 2 matches, back-to-back, 4 goals conceded. I mean, I don't like to sort of talk too much about crisis teams and things like that, but I think we've almost come to expect Rosenborg aren't what they used to be. But has it sort of surprised you a little bit? I know you predicted them this season to be a little bit lower down, but has it actually surprised you how bad they are? And was this game maybe worse than the Viking game, or was the Viking game, potentially better? Or Saita scored tonight for Rosenborg, got their 1 goal, but is this a trend, a worrying trend in terms of what's happening, or has it just been 2 blips, or what exactly is happening in your mind?
Well, he scored against Viking as well, but again, it was a consolation. They were 4-1 down in that match as well. So those goals didn't really matter, didn't mean anything. They're starting to become, and I'm going to use the word to Jamie Carragher here. He says there's a lot of Monday Night Football in the UK on Sky Sports, that Rosenborg might become everyone's second favourite team if they weren't so hated so much. And I'll tell you why. It's because their matches are just like a basketball game, end to end. You are not going to be bored watching Rosenborg fixtures this year at all. But and everyone's going to enjoy seeing them because they're just going to make so many mistakes at the back, but they're just going to push for goals themselves. They seem incapable of defending. So for their own fans, it must be very frustrating that they look like getting blown open defensively on a regular basis. I mean, mixed in with that, they did beat Odd at home, 2-1. They beat Christiansen 2-1 at home before the Euros break. So their home form isn't that bad this year. In fact, it's obviously quite half decent because 5th best in the league, won 4 out of 7 at home. But away from home, they don't seem to have any answer. Quite why that is, maybe the natural grass pitch at home maybe suits them better, or maybe the teams go there and struggle a bit more. But in terms of a tactical setup, it just looks like mayhem to me, and they do not ever look like a team that's going to control a game of football.
Yeah, worrying times, Steve. And there was also a little bit of maybe not controversy, but I'm interested to get your take on this and listeners as well. As reported by TV2 and our good friend Nordisk Norvège, who is a great account to follow, by the way, if you're French, if you're a non-English speaker and you follow this league. Alfred Johansson, after the game, I believe it was against Viking, it might have been, or before the game against Viking, arrived 15 minutes late to an interview. And when he was asked why he was late, he said, "I'll be honest with you and say that you are very far from my list of priorities when it comes to my daily life. It is more important to me to develop the team than to start the interviews with you on time." Now, I can understand the sentiment of that in terms of a manager's priority obviously will be the media. Will be his players and coaching the team. And I can understand maybe they're under a bit of pressure. Did these comments sort of come as a bit of a surprise to you, Steve? Did it give away? Maybe did the mask slip a little bit in terms of maybe a bit of pressure on Rosenborg? What were your thoughts about those comments?
Well, it's the sort of comment Jurgen Klopp would say when Liverpool are top of the league, isn't it? Quite cocky, sort of in your face sort of thing. But this guy's mid to lower table. So it's very strange indeed that he's come out with that. He's a 33-year-old head coach. Rosenborg is his first senior job. He was with the FC Copenhagen youth teams throughout the ranks, and I think he he's a little bit fortunate, that everyone seems to be labelling the club as a work in progress, transition club, building for the future. And he's got that sort of to fall back on. But how long can you sort of give someone in that respect? You've got to see some progress, haven't you? And at the minute, I'm not really seeing an awful lot of it. Perhaps you've got to give him longer than a year and all that lot. But thought that was very strange. But it is obviously a big environment in Rosenborg. The pressure can tell on any manager there. And many a boss down the years has kind of cracked a bit in the media eye because of the intense scrutiny put on you in that position. They're a massive club. Yeah,
I mean, I thought those comments were quite rude, to be honest. And I think that is a little bit of a tale of pressure. Maybe I can understand the sentiment to a certain extent, and context is maybe key. But as the comments have been reported by Nordisk Norvège there, they come across quite rude. Which maybe is a sign of maybe a bit of arrogance from Rosenborg in terms of their duties to others. So let's move on. I mean, there's one team up that you did want to talk about as well, and that's Glimt at the top.
Before we move on, I better give some airtime to Henrik Meister for his 4 goals. That would be a bit rude. He's probably listening to the pod, isn't he? Thinking, I've got to be given a bit of credit here. But he's a new signing for Sarpsborg. He joined them at the start of last season, and he's not really done much. He was given enough minutes by Stefan Billborn this season up front, but he hadn't scored a goal until Christian Mikkelsen took over. He'd started nearly all the games, by the way, and I think he bizarrely had 3 assists in one match away from home against Tromsø, and that was it. But Mikkelsen, again, I do rate Mikkelsen in this sort of position. He loves being sort of this plucky underdog, and he's got him in different positions on the field. So he's actually operating. You'd like this, Jonathan, because there's a lack of them at the minute in the Euros. And I know you're not a fan of it. A genuine number 9, like he's there. He's in the positions to score the goals, like a poacher, fox in the box, whatever you want to call it. But he's a physical specimen. Still a young lad at 20-year-old. Danish player, a bit of a handful. He looked like he gave Glimt a good game. I remember the Glimt game at the end of June, and I was like, bloody hell, he looks all right, this Meister. I was like, I didn't expect it because he'd shown nothing until then. Put in a good performance there, scored a goal, and then four goals against Rosenborg in one match. I mean, that's staggering, really. But he puts himself about. He just looks a pain in the arse, to be honest, for defenders. He's just going to, when he's in that sort of mood, he's going to cause them all sorts of trouble and disrupt them. So well done to Henrik Meister, who suddenly, from absolutely nowhere, looks like he would be one to add to my mid-season 10 to watch list.
Yeah, and he's a Danish player. As he mentioned, in the back of his career, he played for Fremad Amker and then moved to Sarpsborg on a free in July 2023. So those of you who can speak German, you could say that the Dane Meister shafts Rosenborg.
Yes, Meister, of course, is a German word for master, isn't it? Or whatever the best. My German's not the greatest, but even I knew that one.
So let's move on. Done. Congratulations to Sarpsborg, because there's not a team we talk about a huge amount, actually, to be fair. Should we maybe talk about them, Stephen? The new manager, and I know we did briefly mention them last week, but obviously that's a pretty good sign of things to come potentially with this manager, isn't it?
Mikkelsen's really got his teeth stuck in here at this club. He's the perfect environment for him. It just feels like a great fit. I could tell it right from the first 10 minutes against Glimt that this is going to work. He's a really good manager as kind of a semi-underdog, if you know what I mean. I think the hard part for Mikkelsen is when he's a big favourite and teams set up defensive against him. That's when the problem comes in. But that's not going to happen too often at Sarpsborg. He's generally going to be, there'll be games where they are the favourite. They were the favourites to win tonight. But if you know what I mean, teams, Rosenborg are never going to defend against them. So, great start for him. It's not a bad bunch of players, really. As I say, under Billborn, I just think things got a bit too overcomplicated for the players. He was almost just asking too much of them.
A good result and a good sign of maybe potential things to come for Sarpsborg. As I just mentioned there, you did want to have a kind of word about a few other teams before we talk about transfers. So you talked to me about Glimt 5, Brand 1. That was quite a big game, weekend just gone. And your thoughts around that match in particular.
Do you know in any league, Premier League are guilty of this more than anyone, where you build up a big game, like a Super Sunday, the top of the table clash. Everyone's looking forward to it. It's going to be an absolute cracker. Any results possible, hoping for a few goals. And then inevitably there's like a letdown for whatever reason. Often it's like a 0-0, isn't it? But in this instance, the game was done really after 20, 30 minutes because there was a red card after just 12 minutes. Sivert Helter-Nielsen, who we're going to talk about in a minute, got sent off for 2 yellow cards in what could be his last ever match for Brann. And you can't be down to 10 men against Glimt away from home for 78 minutes, can you? And inevitably, Glimt racked up the score, 5-1 win. It's not the sort of game where they went 2 or 3-0 up and were happy with that. They knew there was a great chance to properly put a sword into Brann, who the nearest rivals in the table. Patrick Berg grabbed a couple of goals in the second half. Brann did get a consolation with, I think, the last kick of the game. Otherwise, they were going to get beat to 0. But, I mean, this is a big result, Jonathan, because it's 5 points clear now, Glimt, with a game in hand against Brann. That could be, I mean, we'd probably look back at the end of the season and be like, that's the pivotal result. That's where Brann were knocked out of the race. It was a crippling result. The two teams are much closer than the scoreline suggests, but you cannot go down 10 men at Aspmyra Stadion for 80 minutes and expect to get a result.
Does it say much about Brann in your opinion, or is it more of a hiccup, or is it more about the quality of Glimt?
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think Sivert Helter-Nielsen, you can't. I mean, was one of the big talisman of the team. You can't expect someone like him to lose their discipline and take 2 yellows early on. You expect him to lead by example, but it kind of does show that maybe it was a pressure situation. Maybe they were a bit overeager to get a result, and even when they went down to 10 men, they just kind of played the same way, Jonathan. They didn't try and slow the match down or time waste. They thought they could still go man to man with Glimt. 11 versus 10. And I've said this before about Brann. They only play one way. There's no plan B. There's no plan C. They play one way, no matter who they're against, no matter what the scoreline, the situation, if they're 1-0 down or 3-0 up. They play lights to flag, 0 to 90 minutes, same way. And it's very admirable, and it's a great style, and it's lovely to watch. And it has delivered them some great success. It's delivered them a fine promotion, Norwegian Cup win, silver medal last year, probably a medal this year. But that was the time then. When you go down to 10, you've got to use the dark arts. I'm sorry. And I'm not an advocate for the dark arts too often. But that was a time where they just had to, all right, maybe lose the game, but don't get battered. Rough a few players up a little bit more. Tactically time waste. But they don't have a plan B. If you actually said to Brann, you need to defend here for the last 30 minutes, I don't think they're capable of doing it because they only have that one. They have different variations of light attack. Of course they do. But they don't have a system that can get them even sort of semi-defensive. So that was to their detriment. And it kind of probably showed their weakness in that respect.
How much could they miss Helter-Nielsen if he does leave?
Well, the last time he left the club in 2018, some people say they were never quite the same again, and that led to their relegation. So the difference now is he's 32 years old. They're in a much better position as a club. They can bring in players to replace him. So as long as they get sort of the transfer dealings right, I think that's not so bad for them. But he's a big presence, as we'll talk about in a minute. Moved to Aberdeen, and a key cog in the Brann midfield, and a big part of their resurgence back to the league, Eliteserien level. So let's see. But he certainly obviously cost them in this game. No doubt about it. If it actually stayed 11 versus 11, the first 10, 12 minutes, it was gung-ho action. It was end-to-end. We never know, will we, what the result might have been.
Yeah, good point. And big top-of-the-table clash there, really. It puts Glimt 5 points clear with a game in hand, just as we hit the halfway stage of the season now, more or less for some teams anyway. Brann have played 15 games now. Molde are down in third. Then you've got Viking, Fredrikstad, Godset, Christiansen and Rosenborg to round off the top 8. Then you've got Sarpsborg in 9th, Lillestrøm, KFM Oslo, HamKam, Tromsø, Odd, Haugesund, Sandefjord. Steve, of those teams in the remaining league that we haven't talked about, is there anyone that you sort of got your eye on at the moment that you're keeping an eye on, maybe a few concerns, or that maybe deserve a bit of praise and mention before we move on to transfers?
I am keeping my eye on Mulder and Viking a bit. I've sensed that both are starting to find a bit more rhythm and form. Mulder's problem, again, as it has been for the last couple of years, is injuries. They just seem to be piling up all the time with this team. It's a good job they've got a big squad to counteract it, but I do like the rhythm they're in. And Viking, how Viking had this amazing run last year, just starting to show signs again of it. This seems to be their time of year, right? July, August. For some reason, they come alive in this period, and I've seen it again. To be fair, I mean, pre-season, I'm just going to look back now at what my actual predictions were. I think I got Mulder second, Brand third, and Viking fourth. So it's starting to kind of go how I foresaw this, because ultimately, on paper, those are the best squads by a long way. Now, down for the rest of the league, I think any other team could go down. Really, like if someone goes on a really bad run, they could get sucked into trouble because there's no out and out shocking outfit this year. Sandefjord are bottom of the table, 2 wins, but they're not terrible. And then after that, it's 13 points. How many? 3 points separates 15th to 9th. So it could be one of them years where if you get on a bad run at the worst time, you could go down because there's. The bottom, the cellar dwellers are not as bad as in previous years, Jonathan.
Very interesting stuff. I think maybe we should move on to transfers now, Steve.
Yes.
And one of the aims of this show is just to bring you listeners a little bit of transfer tittle-tattle. Haven't done that too often in recent weeks and months, of course. And I think it's about time we did that. So we've both picked out a couple of transfers, 5 in total, that we're going to discuss now in this episode. And just analyze them and give you a bit of a flavor of some ins and outs. Well, mainly outs, in fact. And also answer a few listener questions, because we've had a few questions about certain players. Steve, so I've asked you to select 3 players who are maybe on the move that you think could maybe impact the season for those respective teams or for even the destination of the league, potentially, or league places. And you've chosen 3 players, Steve. I thought I'll let you announce them and take it away from there. Obviously, one we just talked about a little bit, but do you want to introduce your 3?
Yeah, well, the 3 player transfers I'm going to focus on in detail in this episode are Sivert Heltze-Nielsen from Brann to Aberdeen, Danilo Al-Sad from Sandefjord to Heerenveen, and a transfer that will almost certainly happen this coming week, Albert Gronbaek from Glimt to Rennes. So we'll start with Heltze-Nielsen because I've been getting quite a few mentions from Aberdeen fans about this, a few questions. A shout out actually to one of my good friends, Hunkleberry Finn, who was a former guest on this podcast when we talked about Aberdeen one year in Europe. And they're all very excited at Aberdeen, by the way. They are very excited about the arrival of Jimmy Tellin as manager. And everyone seems to be very intrigued by the arrival of Nielsen, who was a former player, and the Tellin at Elfsborg, of course. So, yeah, Aberdeen fans, this is the section to listen to.
Yeah, I saw when we posted about the last episode we talked about obviously Jimmy Tellin, and I was a bit sad actually for one of we got a reply, didn't we, from an Aberdeen fan saying I'm really looking forward to listening to that section about Jimmy Tellin, and I think I wasn't massively praiseworthy of him in terms of saying that he's not. I don't think he's going to be the Mourinho of Scotland necessarily, and I don't think that listener ever came back to us and gave us his opinion, so maybe he didn't quite like what I had to say, but yeah, there's a huge amount of excitement. Tell us about where Heltze-Nielsen fits into that, Steve.
Well, I'm surprised that, 32-year-old, I thought he would probably now see out his time with Brann, really. He had his first spell at Brann was very, very good years ago. He sold for $500,000 to Denmark, ended up at Elfsborg for, I think, only half a season, actually, under Jimmy Tellin, and then he moved to Belgium. He doesn't end up in Belgium from the Scandinavian leagues. And look, he's a very good. I think he's an underrated midfielder. He's one of them guys, right? He fits in at D mid. He's good. He's good on the ball. He's physical and he's a bit nasty. Now you don't often get that combo these days, do you? It's either one or the other. I think he's kind of gone out of the game. These what you call 3D midfielders. There's not many of them around. Back in the day, you had like your Roy Keanes and your Patrick Vieira's of this world. Right? He's not in that sort of category, but For example, for many a time he was the penalty taker for Brann. Now that shows you pretty good on the ball technically. He's got good vision. He passes the ball well. But he's not someone that panics too often. He's usually got a lot of composure, which was why I was shocked that he got the yellow card in the last match. Not really in his normal way, but at the same time, he does like to get stuck in. He will put a foot in, no problem. So I think what they're getting there is like a sort of a defensive midfielder, deep line playmaker who's good on the ball, but also will happily give some bite and no nonsense graft in that sort of area. And I think you go well in the SPL because you know what that league's like. Can you do it on a cold, dark night in Inverness or somewhere, or Ross County or whatever this world's? You've got to have a bit of toughness about you, haven't you? Well, he's got that. No doubt about it. From the persona, from what I've seen on the field, I think 330,000 is not that much money, really, is it? I mean, I presume it's not a huge amount for Aberdeen. I don't really know the budget there, but that looks like it's a no. For me, it's not a risky signing because you know what you're going to get from a player like this. He's a reliable human being.
Yeah, and it looks like also from the perspective of Jimmy Tellin, it's someone that he can probably trust. Maybe when you go into a new environment, you want men around you that you can count on and that you know inside and out, and that can maybe regulate the dressing room a little bit as well, isn't it, Steve? Maybe it's that kind of get some good characters in at a cheap price type vibe as well from Tellin's point of view. Surround yourself with the right kind of characters. So maybe an exciting one there for Aberdeen fans to
100%. 100%.
Just to read out his track record, he's played 170 games in the Eliteserien, 17 goals, 10 assists. He's also played 126 games in Obos, 12 goals, 19 assists. And he did have that season in Allsvenskan, also 33 appearances in Allsvenskan in total, and spent in Belgium as well.
75 cards and 4 reds in 428 appearances according to transfer marks. So, that's a card, every 4.5 games, something like that. So, he will get stuck in for them, no doubt about it. And I could see him going all right there. I really could for a year or two. Good, solid signing for Aberdeen. And, you know what it's like in Scotland. You can get sort of cult figures, can't you, within a club? Guys who are willing to get dirty if needs be. And I think he could become a bit of a fan favourite, up there.
Bit of a rugged character, it sounds like, Steve. So thanks for that one. We're going to move on. Aberdeen fans, let us know your thoughts. Obviously, tweet us at Nordic Foot Pod or leave a comment on the YouTube channel and give it a follow as well. Subscribe, Nordic Football Podcast YouTube. Growing as always at the moment. Steve, the next one on your list is, as you mentioned, Danilo Outside. And he has moved for a bit more of a fee than Helton Nielsen. So talk to us about this player and why you've chosen him.
I really like this. I think it's a great story. This is a fantastic news for Sandefjord, who, they're not a big, massive club in Norway. They sold him for 900,000 euros. That's a huge figure for Sandefjord. I'm pretty sure it's a club record. They brought him from a club in Sweden in February 2023 called Sandvikens, who I think are about tier 3, maybe tier 4. Actually, they're in Superettan now, but they weren't when they bought him. So tier 3. There's no actual list of how much it cost them, but he would probably have been 50,000 or less, no doubt. So they've obviously made great profit on him. And this is a guy who's given his absolute all to the club in the last year and a half. Probably kept them up last year. Fantastic technical winger who will come in on the left-hand side, strong right foot, inside forward sort of territory. And, how old is he now? I think he's at an age where it was a good time for him to move on for him. Sort of a late developer, 25 now, Jonathan. So it's one of them players that was kind of caught a bit late compared to normal, but it probably means, and I've noticed this with him, he showed a lot more maturity on the field. Unlike, say, a raw 19-year-old, 20-year-old winger, because he's a bit older, his decision-making was far, far better than someone, would have been his junior age. So they're actually getting here and being quite an established star. Well, not star, maybe become a star again, but an established player who, again, they know kind of what they're getting. It's not raw talent anymore. This is someone who is approaching or nearly in his prime right now.
According to Transfermarkt, Steve, his stats this season are 7 games in Eliteserien 2024 season, 1 goal, 2 assists. Not too bad. not too bad. What do you think Heerenveen are getting with this player, and what do you think the team he's leaving, Sandefjord, are going to lose from it? Because, they're not having the best of seasons.
Well, unfortunately, they're losing their best player, really. Let's be honest. Last season, he kept them up. I don't want to say single-handedly, but it was a massive reason. 11 goals, 2 assists in a team that finished in the playoff. I mean, that's impressive, isn't it? To score that many goals in a poor team. This year, he's been plagued by injuries a bit. And also, ever since really the last autumn, there's been transfer talk. The presumption was he would leave in the winter. That sort of thing can, it's hard for the player, isn't it, in their head? They don't know whether they're coming or going sometimes. Ultimately, it's the clubs that control their destiny. He might have been thinking, preparing to go in the winter window. That didn't happen. So now that now he's moved on and hopefully fully fit, I think he can focus on, a summer with Heerenveen in the off season, get himself ready. And, let's see how he gets on in the Dutch league. You either sink or swim there, don't you? You can be really good, or he might end up in Scandinavia again in a year or two's time. But I think he can show something there because I'll tell you now, Jonathan, technically, he's exceptional, in my opinion.
Yeah, and we've seen players move there in the past from these leagues. There's one who specifically comes into mind who we had as a 10 to watch, didn't we, Steve?
Yeah, it's not a massive surprise for me that this has actually happened because the club itself have been moving in the right directions in terms of recruitment, in terms of actually developing some youngsters. And I think I've said before that, and I might have done them a disservice where I've said they might have got a bit lucky with a couple of these players that came in through the ranks that might have been local, but maybe there's something more to it. I think Sandefjord as a club are doing the best job they possibly can with the resources they have to develop long-term. And they are thinking long-term because, even if they go down, I think this is the sort of club that always will now be in a good position to come straight back up. And at some point, they may well actually establish themselves as a genuine Eliteserien club. And, you could argue that's kind of happening now. If they could avoid a relegation this year, they're well on their way. And it's not just luck, is it? You find these players and you develop them. And they are now a club worth looking at for scouts or whatever out there for these younger players that they are bringing through the ranks, either with development for coaching or in actual transfers.
Yeah, and just on Heerenveen, the player I was going to mention there was Osame Saoui, who seems to be doing really well, by the way, at Heerenveen. He's got 47 appearances, 9 goals, 13 assists, and according to Transfermarkt, his value is now 8.5 million.
That's a big positive, isn't it? Like for Al-Sad, maybe Al-Sad looked at that and thought he's done well there, so I can go well there. I don't know. Maybe that's how I would see it. I think that's a big positive for Heerenveen. And
he left for 1.7 million euros of Saoui, and he's increased his value significantly. And as you've just mentioned there, in terms of the fee, looking at 900,000 euros for Al-Sad, and maybe he'll look to replicate Saoui's trajectory. And who knows, maybe he could even come into the same team as him and play together. Steve, just finally, I mean, you've just praised the development policies of Sandefjord. However, they are rock bottom of the league. They're 10 points after 14 games. They're 4 points adrift from getting out of it currently. Odd, Tromsø and HamKam all on 14 points in 14th, 13th, and 12th, which is safety or relegation playoff. In a short answer, do you worry for Sandefjord now? As you've just said, he single-handedly nearly kept them up, nearly single-handedly. Is it looking like potential nails in the coffin?
Yeah, I do worry for them. I'm worried about them for some time, and they've just kind of found a way to stay afloat. They try and play good football. There's certain games they can probably beat anyone on their day because they're quite fearless. But I think what they need now, obviously, when you lose such a good player, they got to find some more quality. This summer transfer window, they have got to find some, not just pace and flair and promise, but like genuine end product to replace this guy. They need to find. In Ruud Tavetta, they've got a goal scorer who knows where the back of the net is. Now they need a reliable provider. Really, they need to buy a couple of good technicians. But it's not a shocking squad. Like I said, it wouldn't shock me if they turned it around and got themselves on a decent run and managed to survive, because they're just a couple of pieces short of what they might need. And there's definitely, I don't think any teams can just presume that they're gone, because far from it.
Fantastic. And let's move on to your final pick, Steve. You've gone for one here that's not actually done yet, but looks like it could happen. And if it does happen, I think it's one that could be, well, a lot of money.
Well, yeah, this is going to be Albert Gronbaek to Stade Rennes in Rennes in France. And this looks like it almost certainly is going to happen. Glimt have accepted a bid of around 170 million Norwegian kroner for Albert Gronbaek. And this we think the deal will end up between 12 to 15 million euros, which is a huge fee, obviously, for any player leaving the Scandinavian region. I think it would be a record. The current record is David Datro Fofana from Molde to Chelsea. That was 130 million Norwegian kroner, which was it 10 million pounds, I think. So this would be more. I know in Sweden, for example, Malmo sold Larsson for a big fee, didn't they? Last year. I think this would topple that. So this is huge. I mean, and it's been coming for a while, because I've said for probably the last year and a half that Albert Gronbaek's just too good for Glimt, and how on earth have they kept him? They signed into a new deal at the start of the year. But I don't think it was ever one of them deals that probably a bit like Archie Gray at Leeds, where deep down the club expected him to stay much longer. It was just probably a deal that suited both parties, and the club knew they could get good money for him come the summer. He's far too good for Eliteserien level. It's just got to the stage now where forget about loyalty, forget about wanting to get Glimt in the Champions League or whatever. He has just outgrown the Eliteserien. It's as simple as that. He's far too good for this level. He has to now test himself at one of the top leagues in Europe. And, the French league might well be a good level for him. Rennes is an excellent club. It's known for its coaching, top youth players. And, yeah, this looks like a great move. This would be a great move for the player and obviously for the club itself to get that amount of money on top of some of the other sales they've had in the last 3 or 4 years. It's quite remarkable. He said to me when we started doing the NFP that Glimt will be selling a player for 15 million euros in summer 2024. I'd have been like, what on earth are you smoking?
Well, this is the thing. I think Scandinavian teams have figured it out now. They don't need to sell to Belgium for cheap. They can sell direct to the big 5 leagues for more money. We're going to come on to that in Sweden in a minute as well. And I think they've found that out now. And I genuinely think this could be a landmark transfer, Steve.
Yes.
In the trajectory of the whole region, because it happens a little bit in Denmark, hasn't it? There've been some big transfers out of Denmark. But I think if teams like Norway and Sweden can start to sell players with this sort of money, I genuinely don't see any reason. And we had this debate last season, didn't we, Steve, on the podcast? When a lot of players left for the Netherlands and went to teams like NEC Nijmegen and clubs like that. And I remember we had a little debate about are these teams actually that much better than Eliteserien or Allsvenskan level? Is the Dutch league that much better below the big teams like PSV, Ajax, and Feyenoord and teams like that? And we had this discussion, and it was a bit controversial at the time. But I genuinely think if these teams can start to make 15 million off one player, Steve, it's going to completely transform the whole club, these clubs. And we might start to see them rising in the coefficients based on the back of this, because if they can reinvest that money, Steve, from a Gronbaek, and keep growing Glimt, a team like that, and they've even held on to their manager, who, of course, there's been so much talk about him leaving over the years. This could be a genuine game changer, these kind of big transfers. Just before you sort of answer that as well, I just want to throw in a little question there, Steve, in terms of Gronbaek himself. He's 23. He's a Danish player. He scored 8 goals in 14 appearances this season in the Eliteserien and 2 assists. What kind? I mean, you've said it's a big transfer, in terms of the loss for Glimt. What kind of player is he? I know he's a central midfielder, but could you just describe his qualities, his attributes, that kind of thing?
I've done a couple of articles on him for Y-Scout for us, and they were well worth reading. He plays a sort of attacking midfielder or central midfielder on the left-hand side. I think a good role to describe him as would be perhaps a Metsala, or at times he can play inside forwards. Very good technically. Scores a lot of goals, gets himself into a lot of shooting positions. Sort of player that plays a lot of fast-paced 1-2s, technical passing. It's not a slow-paced player. And you said this could be a landmark deal, landmark signing. And I agree with you, because I think it's going to work out really well. I think people will see this player. He's, again, approaching prime age. He's going to go into a team which is going to suit his style. It's a great fit, by the way. The manager there, Julian Stefan, plays a style that's going to suit Gronbaek. He's surrounded by some brilliant technicians like you know, Santa Maria's, your Borges of this world, one of the Desiree Doué, or if he even stays at Rennes. Yeah, there's some very good players around him. It's going to make him even better. And he should hit the ground running straight away. You know, he might be on the bench sometimes, but they are getting a very good player who can make an impact immediately. It's not like a 19-year-old who they've got to loan out again or something like that. He can go straight in and do the job. So I just wonder if this works out, teams might be looking and be like, do you know what? We can take players straight from Scandinavia who are ready for us straight away, rather than this stupid, wait for the middleman in Belgium or take them when they're 17 and then loan them out for 3 years. Scandinavia is now becoming so strong, you can take the player directly because they're actually ready for you straight away from the off.
Now, that is very well eloquently put, and we've had this discussion, but a counterpoint to that, Steve. Going to name you a few players. Hakon Evjen, Jens Petter Hauge, Patrick Berg, Fredrik Bjorkan. What do they have in common?
Yeah, you are going to... Yeah, I mean, what I will say with those other players is near enough all of them.
Is my question, basically.
Near enough all of them, yeah. Some people say that the Glimt system makes players look better, and once they move away from the Glimt system, it's a problem. What I'll say is that Evjen is older than what a lot of those moved on. And Patrick Berg, for me, was unique because he went to a Lons team who had two undisputable holders in his same position. Seko Fofana was one of them. You know how good he was that year. And I forget who the other guy was in midfield for Lons that season. He just couldn't get in the team because the other two ahead of him, which is so good. I actually believe if he'd been given a long run of games in the side, he would have been all right. Now, okay, the rest of them were maybe a little bit raw at times. Björkan, I'll be honest, I was surprised that didn't work out because that was only Bundesliga 2, wasn't it? Hertha Berlin, I think. So that one was a concern, no doubt. So it's not a complete guarantee, but I think he couldn't have handpicked a better club, personally, for France, for top league. So if this one doesn't work out, all right, yeah, I think we're going to have to say there is something, Glimt players perhaps are not the area to go with. They'll be looking at Glimt and thinking they're making an absolute fortune here on players that don't end up really achieving what they want them to.
Yeah, you never know. It could go one or two ways. I mean, it sounds like he's a genuinely, really good player, and Rennes is a good environment, as we both know from our experiences in French football, of course. So could be a great move for all parties, Steve. Let's keep an eye on it and see how it goes. I think we're going to we're going to shake hands now and change ends. I think half time.
Yeah.
And when we come back, we're going to look at some transfers in Sweden, and then we're going to look at the rest of the goings on in that league and the return of Allsvenskan.
Welcome back to the Nordic Football Podcast. Just heard me talking about some key transfers that are just going to leave the Eliteserien. We're now going to talk about a couple of big ones in Allsvenskan, the transfer window. We know it's coming to the manic season now in the summer here. We actually had a question on the last episode. We couldn't properly answer it because we didn't have enough time. But Paul Faulkner on Twitter at SuperBobGod, he said, my team, West Brom, are about to sign Hegem. What are your thoughts on this guy? Is he more of a centre-back or a left-back or vice versa or what? Now, this transfer has fully gone ahead since then. It is from Brommapoikana to West Bromwich Albion. Jonathan, Torbjorn Hegem, what is your opinion on this deal?
Yeah, and thanks a lot for the listener question. Of course, we couldn't get around to it on the last show, but it's always good to hear listener questions, and really appreciate you asking for our opinion. Yeah, he's a 25-year-old Steve. He's been in Sweden for a couple of years now, just coming up to 2 years. He originally came from Sandnes in Norway, where he played out some time, did really well there, and obviously the second tier, the Obos, and then got his move to Bromma in 2023. So it's been a bit of a rapid move. Within 18 months, he's got another move on. Formerly Rosenborg youth, and positionally, yeah, I mean, he's a left-footed defender, big lad. He can play as a centre back. I think he's got good attributes in that sense. He's physically strong. He's not the quickest, but he's not too bad, and speed wise. But the good thing as well, just to answer the question, is that versatility. He can play as a centre back, or he can play as a left back. I think his attributes will suit more of a centre back role. Whether Corberan maybe wants to experiment with his back line, if he was to say, for example, go to 5, maybe 3 at the back, for example, play 5-man defence, I think Hegem can potentially maybe play as a left-sided centre-back in that 3, or maybe even play as a left-back in a 4, maybe as a wing-back, although I don't think that's necessarily a specialty. I don't think he's hugely pacey, if that makes sense. He's good in the air. He got a good goal, for example, against Malmo earlier in this season for Bromma Poikina, who took him on in January, as I mentioned there, 2023. And I think, it could be a good move, potentially. He said that he's delighted. He said that he has dreamed about playing in England. He said that English football has always been the biggest thing in Norway, which is probably true, to be fair. And he said it's a dream for every boy growing up. So obviously he's got his big move, which he's delighted about. And he said he's really looking forward to it. It happened all really quickly, and he's ambitious, and he's can't wait to work with a coach and get started. So yeah, I think it's interesting, Steve, because there'd been a lot of talk about Hegem after 6 months or so. Once he had adapted to Swedish football, there was links started to come in, but it was mainly from Germany, and all the noise came out of the club and came out in Sweden seemed to suggest that he was going to head to the Bundesliga too, maybe with Paderborn. They were the team who was strongly linked with him. And then all of a sudden, just out of the blue, really, Steve, West Brom came in. And as he's mentioned, even in his interview, it all happened fairly quickly, and the deal's done. So that is the new signing for West Brom. Obviously, they're in pre-season now, planning for the new year. And I think as a championship player, it will be a challenge for him because it is a big step up. But I think he's got the physicality to be able to deal with it.
Yeah, another negative for Rosenborg, unfortunately, here. He actually came through their youth system. Another player that has basically slipped through their fingers. They loaned him out to Ranheim, gave him to Sandnes for a free. Obviously, Rosenborg didn't think that he would become anything. 2 or 3 years later, he's in the championship with West Brom. So, this kind of sums the Rosenborg up as a club, doesn't it, recently? But I actually hadn't seen any of him before he moved to Allsvenskan. I do follow the Obos a bit, but I can't say I specifically noticed him. But it seems like he's built up his career gradually at that level. Obos is not a bad standard now, as you know. And, Bromma Poikin, he's caught the eye. And now West Brom. I mean, he's a big lad. He's 1.92 centimeters. Meters, sorry. 1.92 meters. Sorry.
Wouldn't be very good in the air if he was 1.9.
I had the imp from Game of Thrones in my mind there for a minute. But yeah, Hegem. I mean, look, Carlos Corberan. We talk about good managers. I mean, he's a very good technical manager. So he could very well go from strength to strength there if he settles in at championship level. I mean, they're not paying a lot for him. 600k. That's not a lot for a championship club. It's almost no risk territory really for a club like West Brom. So. And yet again, another sale for Bromma Poikina down the years. They've always had plenty of good sales, haven't they? Actually, someone that hasn't come through their own academy for once, they're actually making money on. How old is he now? Is he 23? 25, sorry. 25 again. Interesting sort of age, isn't it? Like these guys are getting transferred at a more mature age than historically, perhaps now. They're more the finished product.
Yeah, I think this is a player who he's sort of been around the block, really. I think he served his time, and it's a sort of good, it's a feel-good story. And when he talks about his dreams to play in English football, I bet when he was sort of playing in Obos, Steve for Sanders, he never thought that, because it's been a rapid rise. 3 years. It's pretty much 3 years, less than 3 years, even 2 and a bit years, pretty much. And he's gone from second division Norway to Championship, which that shows you, Steve, the pathway that can be for these kind of players who work hard. And we mentioned on the last show, those who maybe didn't listen to the episode yet, you can go back and listen to it on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube. We talked about my trip to Mjøndalen, obviously, and Norway, and seeing the teams train out there. And it just makes you realize, you can be playing in that environment. And then the next thing you know, he's going to be playing in front of sort of 25,000 fans, even playing against Leeds, Steve, because if I remember rightly, you didn't get promoted. So not wanting to remind you of that, but so the point I'm making is he's playing against these big clubs he's going to be playing against. So massive move for him. I think from Bromo Poikinen's point of view, they will miss him. I think they've still got enough to sort of stay up. They've been okay this season. Just lost against Elfsborg 3-0. Not the greatest of results. He didn't actually play a huge amount of their games this season. He's been in and out of the team at certain times. But he is a good talent, and I think he has potential. So let's see how he adapts.
Yeah, there's quite a few Championship fans that listen to this podcast. I would like to say, and I'll do a scout report on him if I can afford a ticket. We know what the prices are like at Ellen Road. Actually, Leeds have put a cap on away fan ticket price to £30, same as Premier League level. So fair play to the club for that. But I'd like to maybe Charlotte, who there's a regular listener down the year, she might see him in action at Sunderland against West Brom. I think we've actually got a couple of West Brom listeners. Obviously, Paul. I think there was someone else as well. If I do apologise for getting your name. But yeah, let's check him out. See how he gets on in the English Championship. Going above the Championship.
Sorry, Steve, now. I just need to correct myself there, because he did actually play every game for Bromo Poikinen this season so far. So I made an error there. Yeah, I said he's in and out of the team, but that's not true.
I think last season he was a little bit more in and out of the team, wasn't he? Off memory serves me correctly. But don't.
You know what it is? I saw that he's not played for a month, and I had a bit of a brain freeze. I thought that I was thinking, where's he been for the last month? But actually, there's been no games. So that's
I know. Yeah, the good old mid-season break in Scandinavia when the weather's perfect and everything. But moving above the Championship now to the Premier League and a club. Well, is there a better club in world football at actual signing players, raw, younger, and just developing them into world-class talents and then selling them to Chelsea for a huge fee? Brighton have got involved. I can't remember Brighton ever buying a player from Scandinavia in our time. In NFP, there probably is someone. I just can't remember anything like this. There's a big buy, a big sale from the Allsvenskan to Brighton. Tell us more about it.
Well, actually, funnily enough, it's just been announced in the last 29 minutes, officially. We were expecting it to be announced, and there has been a transfer from Brighton to Sweden, Steve, to Ayari, who was transferred from OIK a couple of seasons ago. It's not quite worked out for him yet. But
I can't remember that at all, to be honest.
Yeah, no, it was a bit of a surprise, actually, out of the blue. But Brighton have actually literally just tweeted while we've been on recording. We're delighted to confirm the signing of central midfielder Malik Yalkuye from IFK Göteborg on a contract until 2029. Steve, this is a big signing. It's the biggest in the history of IFK Göteborg. It smashes the record that was set by Benjamin Nygren, of course, who we talked about many years ago. I think that was around 5 million euros. And I believe this is going to be around double once add-ons and everything is concerned. Steve, this is a big player. Unfortunately, we didn't get around to the 10 to watch, but he was one of the main ones on my list. If anyone's listened to the Jens Bertlasker interview, I mean, everyone's leaving EFK at the moment, aren't they, Steve? We've had the interview with their manager and he's left. And now we've got one of their best players and he's left. But Jens Bertlasker, the former manager of EFK, who recently left, on that interview on the podcast, if you go back a few episodes, we did actually ask him about Malik Yalkuye. At that point in time, Steve, he'd only played one game in the league, and they were already raving about him, Steve. And it's not taken more. I mean, it's taken 13 games basically for him.
Well, this is crazy. I just want to say to the listeners, right? He wasn't even an EFK player until February the 1st this year. He's come from an Ivorian club called AS EC Mimosas. And I mean, he's only 18 years of age. This is crazy. Like, this is a Brighton of signing someone that's only been in Allsvenskan for less than half a season for, potentially, rumours up to £10 million. I mean, this is a staggering rise. This guy must be a genuinely young superstar in the making. You tell us a bit more about his strengths.
Yeah, it's not quite £10 million, but €10 million. Although the pound is strengthening now, I think, with a few little factors. And yeah, in terms of his ability, Steve, you mentioned there. Yeah, I mean, he has actually been at the club for a while before February, but he trained. He was there on trial and things like that, and he was essentially not registered until February.
Right.
Okay. Steve, a good friend of mine who found him, discovered him, Ole Sultan. I have to give a massive shout out. He is the scout that found him in Africa. And he actually said on a scouting trip to Africa, this is the best player I've ever seen in my 30 years working in football. He wrote a scout report, and it was the highest ever grade he'd given a player, basically. And it was his final job because he's now moved on to Kalmar. So parting gift. I did mention on a podcast, I think last season, Ole Sultan, one of the nicest people I've ever met in football. I'm happy to say that on the record. He's now moved on to Kalmar as a scout, but he discovered him, brought him to IFK Gothenburg as pretty much his parting gift before leaving the club after many, many years there serving at IFK. When I first moved to Gothenburg, Steve, he was the first person to invite me into a club to go and like have a chat and have a coffee. So I'll always remember Ole Sultan for that. He's a great, great man. And he is a great scout as well. And he discovered him. This player has been dubbed sort of the new Kante. So you can gives you a bit of an idea of his profile. He's a sort of bustling, energetic midfielder, Steve, very brave, very adaptable. From people within the club, the feeling is that he's kind of extremely smart as a player. He can adapt really quickly. As you can see, he's taken 12 games to adapt to Swedish football and get a move to the Premier League. And yeah, I think Brighton fans can be quite excited about this one. I'm not sure necessarily he's going to go sort of straight into the team. I mean, even the manager there, Steve's only about 31, isn't he? I think the new manager at Brighton. So everyone seems to be pretty young there at the club. I think he's the youngest Premier League manager in history, I believe, the new manager there. But it looks like an exciting deal. And I think in terms of EFK, Steve, it's a massive game changer in terms of their finances, because although they're not having the greatest of seasons on the pitch, they off the pitch are obviously looking to boost their finances. And this deal is something they really probably do need to regenerate the squad a little bit. And in the absence of their new manager, obviously they've got a new manager as well, Steve. So things seem to be sort of like moving around at the moment. And they've already brought in Erling Mark as a potential replacement. But I think in terms of Yalkuye, Steve, he would have been, it's a shame we didn't get to do the 10 to watch, but I would have 100% had Yalkuye in there. I did see him live when I went to Gothenburg back in April, May against Djurgården. And yeah, he's a very exciting talent, I think, Steve. And Brighton generally don't get too many wrong. So that gives you a bit of a hint. The fact they're willing to spend sort of 7 to 10 million euros gives you a hint at how excited they are about this player.
Fabian Hertzler, who is the new Brighton coach, I think they got him from St. Pauli in Germany. And I mean, honestly, normally that is the sort of move I would criticise. Like, that's way too young for a Premier League manager, but it's Brighton, isn't it? You can never really question what they've done because they've had such success. I could keep my mouth shut because, yeah, seriously, they're the one club I would never even think about questioning ever. Tony Bloom, the owner, is one of the most remarkable brains around in business and football, everything, betting, the lot. He's a man I'd be interested in meeting, I'll say one day. But yeah, listen, how about which club he's going to end up on loan at? Surely he's not going to be ready to be starting matches in the Premier League this early, is he?
Well, I think speaking to the club and in terms of sort of like what Jens Bertlascu said on his interview and what I think is they're most impressed with at EFK and even potentially probably Brighton is how quickly he learns, how quickly he's adapted. And from that point of view, I don't think it'll be a massive jump for him to maybe go I don't think he'll go straight into the Premier League. I think he's going to need some time today. Although he's very sort of strong, but he is quite wiry. And I think that the pace of the game, I mean, the first game...
French, maybe a move to France on loan? Feels about
potentially.
Right.
Brighton obviously have their own feeder club, don't they? Saint-Gilloise. So he could maybe go to Belgium.
That's a good point.
Maybe he'd be good enough, maybe even to go straight into an English environment. Who knows, maybe a championship loan or something like that. But I can't see him maybe going straight into the team. But obviously he'll train with the club. Lucas Bergwijn, of course, who we talked about at Tottenham, he's recently given an interview. He's just done his first few weeks, I think, at Tottenham, there from Djurgården, another young talent who left. It was an interesting one, actually, Steve. There was a comment earlier in the season when they played each other. And if you remember rightly, when I was in Gothenburg, it was the game where Djurgården beat IFK 4-1, and Bergwijn was sensational in that match. And a couple of weeks later, Steve, one of the, I think, IFK players came out and said that if Bergwijn's worth, I think it was 6-7 million or however much Spurs paid for him, then Yalkoué is going to be worth more than him. And at the time, because Bergwijn was doing so well, that comment, it kind of like raised loads of laughter. Everyone was just kind of like laughing at the player for suggesting that Yalkoué could be anywhere near Bergwijn, because Bergwijn is like the prince of Swedish football, really, isn't he? He's kind of like the young next big thing. So when it was suggested that Yalkoué will end up being better than him, it was almost laughed out of the room, that comment. But it's come back to bite, because they've actually, I think, made more money than Djurgården, or roughly the same in terms of a fee. And it's happened so ridiculously quickly, Steve. I think that nobody thought he would leave after this short amount of time, but this seems to be happening more and more in Scandinavian football, where players don't even need to play well for that long, really, to get big moves. And it's a massive transfer. There's been some comments from players in the IFK squad who have really praised Yalkoué. They think he's a top talent. So I think it's an exciting transfer, Steve, and it's going to be interesting to see how it goes.
A couple of questions. The first one, this might be a tough question. How do you actually scout someone like this? Like, generally, I mean, you might know a bit more about scouting than me. Like, is it on the ground? Is it word of mouth? Do you just need a bit of luck? It just can't be just complete luck, can it? I mean, how do you find a player like this? So, we're ahead of other clubs, I mean, bigger clubs around. I mean, it seems incredible, that this Ollie Sultan's plucked him out of nowhere from in the Ivory Coast, and it's become as good as this. I mean, credit to him. But how can a scout find someone like this, Jonathan? Are there different ways and methods?
It's a really good question. And you know what? We might have to get Ole on the podcast. I might have a word with him, because it's been a long time coming. I've never actually invited him on the show. Don't know why, really, because he's such a legendary figure, and like a friend of mine, in terms of just how warm he is as a person. He's really not, and a lot of people in football will say that as well. I think he's quite well regarded. He's now at Kalmar. So obviously, if we've got a few of Kalmar listeners at the moment, maybe you're going to be the next club to be finding some gems, because his eyes definitely can't be questioned too much. Especially in the African market, I think he's quite good in that sort of region. How you scout a player like this? It's a great question, Stephen. I mean, I'm writing my thesis on it, so that sums it up. I'm doing my MBA on it at the moment. That is actually my my MBA final project, is looking at player recruitment and recruitment pathways. So it's a really good time to ask me this, because I've been in the library, Steve, for the last week, reading about, for example, labour migration flows to Europe through Africa, and I've been reading about player recruitment, where recruitment comes from, the cultural differences in recruitment strategies. I've been reading all kinds of things, to be honest. So I've enjoyed my time in the library trying to understand a bit more about player recruitment. What I would say in this case, Steve, is perhaps, I mean, ASEC Mimosas, the team that you mentioned from Ivory Coast, by the way, they are a massive club in Africa. So they are the team that discovered the Toure brothers. They're the team that discovered, I'm trying to think who else. Aruna Dindan, for example, came through ASEC Mimosas, I believe. If anyone can remember him, he went to Anderlecht. They've had many players come through. Ivorian internationals have come through that academy. So they've got, I think, maybe some sort of arrangement between the two clubs. They've won the African Champions League, ASEC Mimosas, I believe, and they do have a bit of a proud history about them. So that is a sign of good things from that point of view. And in terms of scouting, it's a difficult one. I'd actually love to know, because I'm actually curious to know. I'd like to see the scouting report on Yalkoué, because he would have seen him in maybe an African game somewhere in the Ivory Coast, potentially, maybe watching 50 players. How do you know that player you've seen is the best one you've ever seen? Because the context is so different. If you're playing in the dusty park in Ivory Coast, how do you know this player, right, he's going to play in the Premier League or whatever? What are the attributes that make you think he's the best I've ever seen? For me personally, obviously, like in terms of non-league, there's one or two players in my mind that I remember watching and thinking, you're the best player I've ever seen at this level. And some of them have gone on to do really well, some of them haven't. So it's quite a curious one. In terms of Yalkoué himself, just to sort of end the discussion a little bit, Fabian Herzler said, we're really happy to get Malik to the club. He's a talented midfielder who has the potential to develop into a top-class player. We've had a comment as well from EF Core. They seem to be quite happy about it. The club director has said, and this is quite an interesting comment, Steve, you might like it. From the first scouting to the work of bringing him into our club and now the negotiations with interested clubs, together we have shown that our business is at a high strategic level and that we have the competence and know-how to make such an important transaction and complete it. I'm proud of our entire team and also impressed with how Malik has handled everything. That is club director Hakan Mild. Ole Larsen, technical director, has said Malik is a player who made an impression immediately. And he said, I think many will look back on his time with pride and say, I was there at Malik Yalkuye's first game, or I saw Malik when he came through at Gamla Ullevi. So these words are not, that says a lot, doesn't it, Steve? You don't hear that often, that high praise.
No, you don't.
So I think the future's bright. I mean, I was actually there at his first league game, so I'm pretty proud about that one as well. But I'll be honest, and it might be a bit of a admission of failure on my part. I didn't sort of like come away from the game and think, this guy's going to be in the Premier League in 6 months' time when I watched the match. He did show a few little things where I thought, wow, covers ground well. His passing wasn't amazing, but, he's sort of quite intelligent in positions he takes up, quite good dribbler. He made some decent runs. But I remember coming away from that game just thinking about Lucas Bergvall, to be honest. So although Yalkuye did quite impress, and I thought, right, he's going on my 10 to watch, I didn't come away thinking, I'll never forget that performance and he's going to the Premier League. So maybe I need to refine my own eye, Steve.
Scouting, very interesting. I worked with a guy on another show called James Easton who scouted in France for many years. And he used to occasionally tell us some stories about it. And we always said this needs to be on a completely different podcast. We need to get some scouts on a podcast, Jonathan. Put them in together, and I think they would make some fantastic listening. Really would. Yeah, I think it's an area which is fascinating for a lot of listeners out there. Just briefly on EF Core, obviously, look, they're hovering outside the relegation zone. How big of a miss is he going to be for them? I mean, he's only been at the club for half a season on the field. And now perhaps, they're losing obviously a big talent. Is that a significant loss? It's a weird one, isn't it? Because he obviously hasn't played that many games for them down the years. It's not like you're losing a player that's been there 2-3 years who's been integral. But at the same time, obviously, he's performed very well.
Well, he didn't play, Steve, against Vynamo at the weekend just gone, and they lost. And that could be a little bit of a warning sign, to be honest, because Vynamo are not having the best of seasons. They're not the Vynamo of last year, for example, where they did so well and stunned everyone and finished so high up the table. I think EF Core, the benefit for them is they probably will bring in quite a few players. Billborn's coming, obviously. August Erlingmark is at the club now. I think that they're now probably going to bring in a few more players during this summer window. It probably will allow them to keep maybe one or two that they might have thought about selling, maybe Santos or Mucholi potentially. I mean, there's a lot of upheaval, Steve. The assistant manager has just left. The manager left. Now Yalkuye's leaving. I think it will affect them in the short term. I think Yalkuye, he did so well, Steve. He seemed to sort of get better and better with each game. And that was the thing, he did make big improvements rapidly. And I think he blends that midfield together. So I think they will miss him. And don't forget, Steve, they're not exactly having a great season already, even with him in the team, someone so young in his first ever year. I mean, Gustav Svensson, Steve, just to comment just a bit more on Yalkuye, he said he's the best talent I've ever seen on Allsvenskan. The way he dominated Allsvenskan, I've never seen before. That's what Emil Salomonsen said. And Salomonsen, by the way, Steve, we had him on the podcast last year, for anyone who might remember, after I was there against Degerfors. So, yeah, this just tells you how good he is potentially. I think EFK will struggle in the short term. I think the goal for the club probably isn't really going to be too much more than, not to say avoid relegation, but I don't think they're going to expect to sort of, qualify for Europe this year potentially. It already looks like maybe unlikely. I think this will be a regeneration year for them. I think they'll use that money and reinvest it and maybe look to go again next year, to really start to challenge.
We will certainly keep our eye on the young man from the Côte d'Ivoire and see how he gets on. You were just saying there about the recent defeat to Värnamo. Allsvenskan is back. Incredible. Shock horror. There's actually been some football on the field after nearly a 6-week break. I'm going to go through some results now from round number 13. Mjällby, who, by the way, Mjällby having an amazing season. A 3-2 win against Sirius. Elfsborg with a 3-0 win against Brommapojkarna. And shout out to Elfsborg as well in Europe for another 3-0 win against Paphos. Varnamo 2, IFK 0. As I said there, Malmo with an easy win, 5-1 against Halmstad. Gais 0, Hammarby 0. Most incredible 0-0 draw I've seen for a long time. I'm going to talk about that match myself. Kalmar had a big win for them against IKOR away from home. That was quite an interesting game. Häcken with an away win at Västerås. Västerås, again, underachieving their XG. Surprise, surprise. And Djurgården back on track with a win at struggling Norrköping. Jonathan, it's good to have the Allsvenskan back now after this long break. Weren't really that many shocks, though, were they? It seemed like there wasn't any cold... the big clubs weren't cold or anything. Malmo with an easy win again. Them and Diff remain at the top of the table. Mjällby going unbelievably well. Malmo 7 clear, although Diff do have a game in hand.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a few sort of, so sometimes after the summer break, isn't it, Steve? It's kind of like that. There's a bit of rust. Teams played sort of some mid-season game friendlies and that kind of thing to sort of get the shake the cobwebs off a little bit, and you get that kind of maybe feeling of like the new season almost starting again in a way. So there is that kind of feel of new season, mid-season kind of vibe. I think it started off with Elfsborg. Obviously, they beat Brommapojkarna with their new manager. They beat them 3-0. Baidu, Hedlund, and Gudmundsson on the score sheet there. Then Mjällby, Sirius was a really good game, by the way. That involved Sirius sort of started really well, and then Mjällby came back and got a late winner. IKOR, shock result to lose there against Kalmar, who have really struggled this season. That's a massive win for Kalmar. Obviously, they're under their kind of change of management, as we talked about on last week's show. So that's helped them push up into the relegation playoff now in 14th place. Västerås are sort of starting to fall away a little bit, Steve, although their XG might be all right, but the results aren't doing too well, and they're still rock bottom of the league now. They lost to BK Häcken on the Monday night game. And Malmo obviously taking full advantage against Halmstad and winning 5-1. In fact, this game was a little bit maybe closer than it looked at times, because there was a few late goals in this one. But Malmo obviously comfortable, and the squad's just looking so good. They had a few injuries, but it didn't really matter. Derek Cornelius, of course, who's had such a great season. He was at the Copa America with Canada, but didn't really matter for them. They put 5 past Halmstad. And then I know that you sort of watched Gais Hammarby, so you probably want to have a few words on that. Varnamo beating IFK was a big result as well. I think that's pushed Varnamo up to 9th in the table, which I think is quite big, really, Steve, because they were before that sort of lower mid-table, and IFK now are just 1 point above the relegation playoff currently in 13th place. So, we've mentioned they've lost just a good player there. They've made a lot of money out of it, but they are going to need to sort of buck up their ideas a little bit, because if Kalmar do start to sort of pick up a little bit of a winning run, IFK would be the ones to fall down into it. Brommapojkarna are above them and Sirius, but obviously the other team in the relegation danger is Norrköping, Steve, having a really, really bad season. Lost 3-1 to Djurgården, who have had a decent run. They're looking like maybe the only team that can sort of challenge Malmo, even though they're 7 points behind. They've got a game in hand. That's where we are in the table at the moment.
Yeah, you might be surprised. I only watched 2 games this whole round for Allsvenskan, which is a very low number for me. I really am enjoying the league this year, but I missed the Monday games because I was on a 12-kilometer hike in the Dales. It was such a nice evening. Even I couldn't resist that. I was on the cricket field for the Saturday games, but I did watch 2 on Sunday afternoon. I was watching it same time I was watching the British Grand Prix, actually. AIK Kalmar and Gais Hammarby. And Gais Hammarby, I lost a lot of money on this game. And I think every other bettor or gambler that I know also lost on it. I was on the overs pre-game. I think I backed the overs again at half-time. And then I backed 2 more further goal lines in the second half, because it was incredible. Both teams proper went for it. It was probably the best 0-0 I've seen in a long time. The commitment, the stats might not actually show it. There was only about 18 to 20 shots. But there was 18 corners. I mean, normally, if you have that many corners, someone scores by accident from a corner, don't they? But I was so impressed with the intensity of both sides. Gais, my God, you can actually see why they're doing well this year, because they are fighting like beavers, fighting like lions, ball recoveries. just, you wouldn't want to be facing them, Jonathan. And then you've got a Hammarby team who I think are just, you can tell that the new manager is really implementing a lovely style, but it seems a difficult style to grasp. Even now, it's going to take like a whole season for Hammarby to transition to how he wants it, because they're just still quite missing like the final pass or the final movement. And I mean, that might be because it's come out of the summer break, but both sides, I want to give a massive shout out to both of them for properly going for the win, playing the game in the right way. Referee had a fantastic game. I thought he let it flow. It was a real example where no VAR makes a difference. The game, there was no stop-start moments. I think the last kick of the game, there was a massive penalty appeal actually for Geis. And I actually think if a VAR existed, they would have given a penalty on review for that. But fair play to the ref. Thought he had a great game. It was a great advertisement for the league, Jonathan. Must say, both sides impressed me.
Yeah, I didn't catch this game, but I do think guys have added a lot to the league. I think they're a big club, and we've talked about them in the past. Obviously, this is the first season since we've been doing this podcast, Steve, isn't it, where they've been in the league, and we've talked about them a bit and said it would be great if they came back one day. And I think they've been full value, to be honest. I know I predicted them to go back down again.
Big crowd as well, by the way. There's 16,000 there.
Yeah, they've got a big fan base. They're a massive club in Gothenburg. Make no bones about that, Steve. They're a big club in that region. So that's not a surprise to me. And obviously Hammarby will bring numbers as well. And it's Gothenburg Stockholm games are always a bit tasty. So yeah, no, it's they've added a lot to the league. I think it's great to see them. When you think about, with all due respect, teams like Varberg Boys, they don't compare to Geis really in terms of stature of the club. I think they would admit that as themselves as well. So yeah, it's really, really good to see them back. By the way, I just want to give a bit of a shout out to Mjällby as well, because they're having a great season. And I did sort of predict this in the pre-season preview. I think they're really evolving, aren't they, Steve, under Torstensson, who we had on the podcast earlier in the year. And they just seem to be sort of ticking along really nicely. There is one potential transfer, which I won't talk about now, but it looks like it might happen. Samuel Dahl from Djurgården, the left-back, looks to be maybe on his way to Roma. So that would be a massive transfer as well. By the way, he's had a really good season. I think he's been a brilliant player for the last year or so in Allsvenskan, so we'll keep an eye on that one. But apart from that, obviously, we'll keep you posted on all the developments. I do agree with you about Hammarby. I think there is something going on there, Steve. I think there's the makings of an interesting team there with the managers there. Of course, we've had the assistant manager, David Salini, on the show before. Did try and get the current manager on, Kim Helberg, over the summer, but it didn't quite work out over the winter, when he got the job. But yeah, we'll be back. And
can I just talk about one player before we go? Because I saw the Kalmar game as well against AIK. I actually saw a bit of positivity from both sides here. Kalmar nicked it with a goal in about the 75th minute. But there's a guy, they've had a poor year, Kalmar, but they've got a player, Jakob Trenskow, who has had a great year. 5 goals, 5 assists in a poor team. And he scored again at the weekend. I have to say, this guy, who I'd never really heard much of before. I think he played bits and bobs last year off the bench and stuff. He's actually come into the team and done really well. And this guy, I could see, I'm not sure he stays at the club beyond this season. He's coming playing on the wing there. And he's contributed. He's not just a goal scorer or an assist provider. He does both. I think credit to Jakob, whatever, Trenskow, who, he immediately caught my eye in this game. I thought he was by far their best player.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, Steve, because he's actually made some comments in the last few days where he suggested that he will be leaving. He said he wants to leave. He said he likes Spanish football. He said he's a Barcelona fan, I believe, and that it looks like he's already got one eye on the exit door, basically. He might be moving back to Denmark, is another rumour. You're right, he's had a really, really good season. Sort of come out of nowhere, and he's been the shining light for Kalmar. Where would they be without his goals? They'd be in real trouble.
Bottom, probably. Could be bottom.
They'd be in serious trouble. So, not a great season for Kalmar or Norrköping. They're lucky that Västerås haven't just clicked yet, because if they had, those two could be cut adrift. So, yeah, massive season for them. Like you said, 12 games, 4 goals, 5 assists for Trenskow. Really impressive. 23-year-old Danish wide player. Very sort of technical, modern wide player, isn't he, Steve? He can cut inside.
Yes,
comes in and gets goals. Good feet. Ex-Danish and under 16. So, yeah, definitely, I don't think he'll be at Kalmar past this season if they can keep him in the summer.
To be honest, you could even say he was the best player on the pitch in that whole game, including the IK players. Like, he's just someone who immediately caught my eye. I'm a Barcelona fan. Barcelona BR in the 3rd tier of the Spanish league. If he's interested there, that's a bit harsh, actually. Isn't it? No, he's good. He is good. Jacob, if you're listening, I do really rate you.
Hey, listen, Barcelona, some of their wingers they've signed, I reckon he could definitely do a job ahead of some of them. Some of the players Barcelona buy these days.
Yeah.
And they don't have any money, mate. So, might be a cheap deal.
Could do an awful lot worse. Well, we'll be back again. At some stage, we really do need to discuss the unbelievable expected goal underachievement of Vosteras. That could last a whole podcast, to be honest, Jonathan, but that will have to wait for another day. They continue to... I've never known anything like it, but we will have to... we're going to have a good discussion about Vosteras in the future. Very enjoyable episode, as always, my friend. We look forward to the weekends of action.
Yep, plenty of games. Hopefully you enjoyed this transfer wrap-up as well, so the show will have some shelf life even after the weekend. Just to point out, shout out to Elfsborg, obviously got a 3-0 win in Europe against Paphos. So that's a big win. I know the European games are coming back now, so we will cover those as well. Don't forget, you can now ask listener questions to us on Twitter at Nordic Footpod, and also on YouTube as well if you want to post anything there. And don't forget patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast if you want to sort of buy us a coffee. Buy us a coffee or support us in some way. We will have some juicy content for you, Steve. I might have to dig out Ola Sultan's number and see if he fancies talking to us about scouting one day.
Yeah, get the scouting pod going. Look out for that. Maybe he'll get a special, an NFP special, scout special. But yeah, thanks very much for your time and listening. Any questions, put them in. Any thoughts, get them in. Comment, like, subscribes on YouTube are very much appreciated as well. And any comments on iTunes or Spotify. Can you actually leave a review on Spotify these days? Someone said that you can. I'm not sure I even need. I listen on Apple Podcasts on my personal player. But thanks, everyone. Take care, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.